Now, I know everyone else has had something to say about this, and there's a very sort of clever little trick that they use over at Channel 2, which is that if all of the programs at Sky News at night mention the same story, they say, they've talked about it for 5 hours in a row. Now, of course, you know, I'm not in charge of what the hour before says, and I'm not in charge of what the hour after me says, and I'm not in charge of what's 2 hours, and you get the point, right? But sometimes there are just stories that we know you're going to be interested in. Yes, we're all going to have our little take on it. And a perfect example of that is lefty Laura Tingle and what she had to say at the Lefty Sydney Writers' Festival. Now, of course, she was among the lovies, and she is one of the great high priestesses of ABC loviness at the moment. She's the president of the National Press Club. She's on the board of the ABC, so she's right at the tippy top of her power. And she had plenty to say at the Writers' Festival, of course, all about big bad Peter Dutton, and specifically the immigration conversation where Peter Dutton has decided that this country can take a little break from the record numbers of people that have been coming into the country so infrastructure and the housing industry can catch up.
We are a racist country, let's face it, we always have been, and it's very depressing, but to give a licence like that I find profoundly depressing and a terrible prospect for the next election.
Now, further to all of this, an incredible bit of sort of, I've got to be honest, racism comes out of her concern about racism. Let me play you this bit that you may not have heard thus far.
For a major political leader to be saying, as Nikki says, you know, everything that's going wrong in this country is because of migrants. And, you know, I had this sudden flash of people turning up to try to rent a property or at an auction, and if they look a bit different, whatever you define different as, that basically he has given them licence to be abused.
That is extraordinary. It's extraordinary because when's the last time she ever actually ventured outside the oh-so-white Canberra bubble? Because anyone in any part of suburban Australia, be it the capital cities of New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, you can name the rest, there are people of all different backgrounds, with all different parents from all different parts of the world who were born in Australia. There is no one who is turning around and getting ready to abuse somebody who, quote unquote, looks different than Laura Tingle and blame them for the housing crisis. Are they serious? Now, the reality, again, of the policy that Peter Dutton is putting in place, I'll get to in a second. But if honestly the dog whistle from the left is that if you have any conversation whatsoever about whether infrastructure or the existing housing market can just take another 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people onto it without creating massive strain, well, that's a deliberate attempt to change the subject. The idea that it's Peter Dutton who's got some special dog whistle that can only be heard by the racists of Australia who will turn on the people who look different than Laura Tingle is an outrageously racist thing to say. And it shows the sign of a person who thinks that the suburbs are just full of people who all look the same like her, because maybe that's the last time she actually went into the suburbs. Whereas anyone who's grown up in the suburbs knows that their best mate's parents might have come from Malaysia, but the kid is just as Aussie as you are, or the parents are just as Aussie as your parents. I mean, come on. Oh, no, but it's Peter Dutton who's just doing the dog whistle. But also what I find weird here is that I've never seen a major party blame everything on migration. Well, where was she when the Prime Minister, her clearly preferred Prime Minister, even though I'm pretty sure she votes Greens, so eventually second preference. The Albanese government is cutting immigration. Now, I don't believe they'll actually end up cutting it by the numbers that they're promised, but they're cutting immigration. And what does this Prime Minister say is one of the reasons why we need to cut the number of people that are coming into the country? Oh, that's right, housing.
This is a response to the fact the system is broken.
Do you think the decision then would help housing pressures, for instance? Two birds with one stone?
And in addition to that, as well as the additional investment that we are putting into housing, of course, that is part of the context of what we're dealing with here.
He says it's housing. Yet she goes to the Writers' Festival and it's all Peter Dutton, all of that rubbish. And again, I just can't get back to this sort of odd little account of racism about what she thinks the suburbs actually look like and how a whole bunch of white people are just waiting to turn on the person who looks different. So the Prime Minister's going to cut immigration because of housing. The opposition leader is going to cut it even deeper when it comes to housing. But the policy that she didn't talk about in what the clip we've heard, if she says it somewhere else in the speech, I'll gladly correct myself. But in all the comments we've heard, of course, his policy on top of that is no foreign buyers are going to be allowed into the country, which is not an attack on people of a certain ethnic or religious group. It doesn't matter whether somebody's multiple generations looking like Laura Tingle from the United States or the UK. Foreign buyers means anyone not in the country. So the idea is that right now, when the rental situation is so terrible that literally lines around the block and more than 100 people looking in every place that's available in semi-regional places like Ipswich, that trying to take some people off that queue means there's a greater chance that if you are looking at a property, you might be able to apply for the property and hopefully get the property. Secondly, if you're only competing against your fellow Australians, regardless of what they look like, Laura, regardless of what language they may well have spoken at home, Laura, but you're not competing against somebody who's got the Bluetooth in their ear and they've just got a bit of cashed up money from overseas, then that's good for the people that are trying to buy houses. For her part, Jacinta Price, who always has a great way of cutting through all this garbage and going up and over the top, she nails it on the behalf of normal people.
I'm really disappointed in this continued narrative that is being pushed within our country that does not provide any sense of pride. It absolutely creates division, and we had enough of it during the referendum. And leading journalists, well, supposedly leading journalists, like Laura Tingle, should know better than to use that sort of rhetoric.
But I'll be honest. I was talking to the team that put the show together and I'm, do we talk about this? Do we not talk about this? Not because other shows may or may not have talked about it, but because I make an absolute promise to you. Nothing's going to happen to her. Instead, she'll end up going to the award shows and being showered with more awards. She'll be able to do a whole bunch of side gigs where you get paid to give speeches or to sit on panel, you know, all of that stuff, right? She'll be able to write even more so, and because they're responding to the response, then we're wrapping our arms around. Nothing will happen. But I'll just say this, as a little bit of a media critique. Now, I totally understand, totally accept and totally agree about the cultural worth of the institution that is the ABC. I also understand the importance of its role in news and particularly long-form current affairs. But what annoys me is that the people who are supposedly sitting in the middle, being independent, are able to have side gigs that only come about because of the main gig, where they tell us all their opinions and then pretend they don't have those opinions when they go on air. In the same way that they are told, please don't just splurt out what you think about the world on social media because it affects how people view you when you're on our television, our radio, our communication network. The same should exist when people go off and do the little side gigs at the Sydney Writers' Festival or the Festival of Dangerous Ideas or Vivid or any of the other 700 places where all these people get to say that they're really courageous because everyone agrees with them every time. Now, I know how this plays out, where, of course, we'll be searching for the reason to have a little crack at Sky News or a little crack at the fat bloke on telly, and that's fine, I don't have a glass jaw, come as hard as you want. But someone somewhere should realise that it's a little out of control when you're able to be basically a star on Channel 9 or 60 Minutes without the ads And you got all these other little side gigs that only come about because of the main gig. But of course, as I say, she'll be nominated for Australian of the Year and may well win it, because how dare anyone call her out on what she actually believes or how misleading it is. Doesn't talk about the government's position. That's also about housing. It's all about Peter Dutton. And then there's that weird thing that apparently the suburbs are just full of white people. And the second they see someone who looks different than Laura Tingle, they're going to start having a crack. Please.